Throughout her life, she did her best to keep her thoughts to herself and her immediate circle of family and close friends. But after her death, hundreds of the Queen Mother's letters were made available to a biographer chosen by the Queen. The result is this, the official biography of a woman who spent nearly 80 years at the centre of British life. On the abdication, we learn her view of King Edward VIII, the king who abandoned the throne to marry the American divorcee Wallis Simpson. He must have been bemused with love, I suppose. You couldn't reason with him, nobody could. The whole government tried, everybody tried. And then as Queen Consort alongside her husband, King George VI, there are the most vivid extracts as Britain faced the perils of World War II. On the 8th of September 1940, a few hours after Buckingham Palace had been bombed and she and the King nearly killed, she visited the bomb sites in the East End of London and wrote, "I really felt as if I was walking in a dead city. One could not imagine that life could become so terrible."
400 enemy aircraft were launched.
On the 7th of January 1941, in a letter to her niece, she wrote, "I'm still just as frightened of bombs going off as I was at the beginning. I turn bright red and my heart hammers." But she ended the letter cheerily, "Tinkety-tonk, old fruit, and down with the Nazis." But on one area there's a notable lack of information. Anyone hoping for revelations about the royal family's marriage breakdowns will be disappointed. Indeed, the biography discloses that many letters written by Princess Diana to the Queen Mother were destroyed in the 90s by Princess Margaret.
As a historian, obviously, it's a pity because history loses. But as an ordinary person, I can sympathise with anybody wanting to destroy letters that they thought were hurtful or about other members of their family. She beat cancer in the 1960s, and she took it just in her stride. She went into hospital without telling anybody, and it was just reported that she'd gone in for some routine observation, and she had an operation for cancer, and she came home and told very few people about it and carried on as usual. That's what she always did. She said the great secret of happiness in life was to keep oneself busy, and she lived by that rule, especially after the death of her husband. It's rather important, I think, to remember that she had 50 years, half her life, on her own. She was only 51 when he died, or 50, and she lived to 101. She nearly died. She and the King were nearly killed when a German bomber came up the Mall behind me and flew straight over Buckingham Palace and dropped its bombs. And if the windows of the room in which they were talking and standing had been closed rather than open, they probably would have been killed or very badly wounded by flying glass. So it was extraordinarily lucky. And that afternoon, she went straight off to the East End, which had been bombed much more badly, and many, many people there had lost their lives and their homes. And as she did always throughout the war, she went and comforted people instantly when they needed it. And her presence throughout the country in the war, and that of the King, I think was extraordinarily important to the morale of this country. There are certainly letters about Diana, Princess Diana, and the Prince and Princess of Wales' tragic, sad marriage. And she had, like every other person in the family, had welcomed the princess when she first arrived, and she was terribly saddened when it all went wrong. She was very close to Prince Charles, always. She was devoted to him and he to her. But she never cast the princess aside after their parting, and they remained close and they did things together. And she was a sort of a generous grandmother to her as well as to her grandson.
The Queen Mother was extravagant with money. She followed the horses to the extent that she had a bookmaker's tannoy installed in her front room, and she was famously convivial. But for all that, she was a formidable character whose life was devoted to Britain.
That I had the opportunity to serve my country and its great people.
Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.